Hello and welcome to part two of our Access tutorials. In part one, you had an assignment with a tutorial kind of all bundled into one. And in that assignment, you were able to build an entire system using Access. So starting with a set of data and tables and fields and input forms. And then eventually you made a query, which kind of took the data and did some computations with it to compute the total pay. And then you had a report and then a menu. Um, Often people use Access only for doing queries. So in a professional information systems development team, often there's a set of computer programmers that design a system, perhaps not using Access, but in another system that's similar. And once the system is complete, you have some data being stored in a system like Access, and then the user community often designs queries to extract the data and build custom reports. So I wanted to emphasize for part two of our tutorials, focusing only on the queries in the system. So to begin, I have a few different resources for us to use. I have this website that I have a link to go along with the tutorials. And It's just one of many free tutorial resources out there. Um, so you can use this if you need some help getting started, but I'm going to especially reference a couple different examples on here. There's this quick criteria reference guide that has examples of different criteria that we're going to use. So I may periodically go back to this um, as we're going through the different examples. I also have a Word document that we're going to follow along with. Um, so instead of having in Excel, I had an instructions worksheet. In Access, they don't really have anything like that where I can give us a list of things that we're doing. So instead, I include a Word document that's attached. So I'm going to walk you through in this first video doing these first 6 queries. Um, so let's download, click on the Access link, and once you enable the file, you should get to this kind of blank looking Access file. So we have our list of 4 tables here, but nothing else is built in the system. I have a specific way that I'm going to ask you to do all of the queries in the system. We're going to use this query wizard. We did this in the part one when we did the payroll tutorial, but we're going to use the wizard to select our fields from the tables, and then we're going to complete the query, and then we're going to edit it in design view and make all of our changes. So let's just dive into the first example here. So the query number one, we're going to select all the fields in the order details table, and then we're going to add a criteria to specify only records that have the order quantity greater than 2. So the order details table is this top one. So I'm going to go into Query Wizard here, and I'm always going to select the simple Query Wizard, so I'm just going to select OK here. And then the table, I use this drop-down box to select the table that I want. The first one happened to be the one that we're looking for here, the order details. And I'm going to select all the fields by clicking the double arrow. So now I'm going to click Next. I'm going to click Next again. I'm always going to show every record initially. And then typically you always want to give your queries meaningful names. So I would typically say orders with quantity greater than 2 or something like that, or large orders. But just for simplicity, to keep the the access file in sync with the Word document instructions, I'm going to name the queries query 1 all the way down to query 17 for our last one, which is a really bad thing to do. You don't want to have a database that has a query named query 1, query 2, but just for the sake of this tutorial, I think it's the easiest way to keep things in sync so that you know that when you get done with your file, if you're wanting to go back and figure out how to do something, it'll be easier to match the instructions with the query if we number them sequentially. So anyway, we're going to name this query 1 and then finish. And we get our preliminary results that just kind of dumps all the data from the order details table. So you see in the middle here, there's a field named order quantity, and we want to limit these results only to values where the quantity is greater than 2. So I'm going to go into design view, and I can do that over here by right clicking on the name of the query and then going into design view. And then I want to add a criteria here under order quantity. I'm just going to put a greater than and a 2. In order to see my new and updated results, I'm going to click run up here in the that red exclamation point, and I get my new results, and I always want to spot check the results by looking at the data and seeing that everything does in fact have an order quantity greater than 2 here. So you can see that your results match mine. I like to look at the number of records that are shown. So there's 10,251 records that met that criteria. So we're done with part 1. So I'm going to save, and I'm just going to close, and it's going to confirm that I want to save query 1. Okay, so now we're on to query 2, which is displaying all the fields in a different table that start with the letter B. This one is a little bit, the syntax in this one is a little bit more tricky. So I'm going to open up that web page that we just talked about. So I'm going to go to my web browser and go over to this gcflearnfree.org. And here's an example of a criteria that begins, so this one begins with X. So you where we under the criteria line where we put greater than 2 just a moment ago, in the next query we're going to put the word like, and then since it's a text field, we have to put quotes and then whatever letter we're searching for, and then an asterisk, and then an end quote. Or we could even copy this and paste it over and then change the X to a B. So let's go ahead and use our wizard to get started. So I'm going to go back to the query wizard. Let me recall which table we're using, product category. So I'm going to change the table that I'm selecting to product category, selecting both fields, and I'm going to name it query 2, and then I'm going to finish. And we have a list of product categories and IDs, and we only want those that begin with B. So I'm going to go into design view, and that criteria that I just mentioned from the web page that you could paste over, but I'm just going to go ahead and type it here. So it's like, quote, B star, end quote. And then I'm going to run it again, and now it's limiting the results to products that begin with B. So now I'm going to close and save. So we're on the next one. This one is fairly easy, but it has two conditions. So we're going to use the sales region table where the country code field is equal to either US or CA for United States or Canada. Um, so I'm going to go into the wizard again. I'm going to select the sales region table, all of the fields, next, and I'm going to name it Query 3, and I'm going to finish. So I have all the territories and all the country regions and IDs. So I want to modify this in Design View. Oops, I modified the wrong one. I'm going to close this. I'm going to go to Query 3 in Design View. And I'm going to put in a criteria here under country code. Because it's a text field, I have to put quotes in my criteria. So my first quote is going to be in the main line for criteria. And then I'm going to put the second one in the OR row. If we had an OR condition with different fields, I would be, let's say, OR sales region has a certain ID. I would put that in the OR row for a different column. But since these are the same, I'm putting them in the same column but in different rows. So I'm going to rerun the query, and I'm only getting territories where the country code is Canada or the US. So I'm going to close and save my changes. Notice that I accidentally put a space between query. I want to be consistent in my naming, so they're alphabetical. So I'm going to go over here and right-click on Query 3, and I'm going to select Rename, and I'm going to get rid of the space. And then I'll just hit Enter, and it resorts them. So now we're on to query number 4. This one is a bit of a trick question. So we have an order date in February 2010. There actually isn't a criteria for a particular month. There's an order date. Let's go ahead and select the fields first, and then I'm going to pull up the web page with the quick criteria guide. So let's go into Access, and we're selecting all the fields in the order details, same as we did in Query 1. So I'm going to go to Create, and then Query Wizard, and I'm going to select the order details table, all the fields, and I'm going to name it Query 4 and finish. So notice we have all these order dates, and we want to limit them to February 2010. But there is not a month in here, you just have a date. So in order to accomplish this, I'm going to use what's called a between. So let me go over to the web page and look at the sample criteria for dates. And we want to do a search that falls between two dates. You actually don't need these quotation marks and pound signs. You can just put month, day, year. One thing I'll tell you here is that it includes the beginning and end date when you have this. So I'm going to put February. I'm not going to end with March 1st. I'm going to put between February 1st, 2010 and I don't know if that was a leap year or not. Let's just assume it only has 28 days. So I'm going to go back to my Query 4, and I'm going to go to Design View. And I'm going to add a criteria here for order date. And I'm going to type the word between. And then I'm going to enter the dates separated by an and. So I'm going to put 2/1/2010 and 2/28/2010. I don't know if 2010 was a leap year or not. Just assume it's not. If you want to resize the column to show the entire criteria, you can wait until your mouse turns into similar to Excel, but a little bit trickier, so that the mouse is a little more sensitive. So anyway, here's the criteria between 2/1/2010 and 2/28/2010, and I run it, and all the dates are in February 2010. So I can scroll down and confirm that. And I have 9,531 records that met that criteria, so you can verify that yours were the same. And I'm going to close and save. If I went back into design view, notice that it added those little pound signs that it showed in the criteria, although it does not have quotation marks. I'm not sure. I think that may be a mistake in the guide. But anyway, we'll close and save and move on to query number 5. Okay, this is a fairly easy one. Everything in the order details table where the cost is less than 2 and the order quantity is exactly equal to 1. So these are both numeric fields, so we don't need any quotes. And even though it shows a $sign here, you can just put the number 2 in, just as we did in the first one. So let's go ahead and get started with the wizard. So just as we've done in previous steps, we're going to select the order details table and select all the fields, and then finish naming it query 5. And our 2 criteria here is going to be the standard cost and the order quantity. So I'm going to go into design view, and over here where it says standard cost, I'm going to put less than 2 for less than $2. And over here in the order quantity, I'm just going to put a 1. Now notice I'm putting those on the same row. Since it's an and, it has to meet both criteria. So I'm putting both on the criteria line. I'm not putting one on the or line because it didn't say or. It has to be less than $2 or order equal to 1, order quantity equal to 1. It has to meet both criteria, so both are on the same line. Okay, so I run it again, and all of the prices are greater than 2, and all of the quantities are equal to 1. I have 5,018 records. So I'm going to save, close and save, and move on to criteria number 6. So here's another one where we have a field where we're limiting the records to a certain text phrase. So this one, the word sock has to appear anywhere in the product name. Notice that I'm also picking 2 different tables here. So we have a product category table, of which we're picking 2 fields, and a product name table. So let's first go ahead and do our wizard, and then I'm going to pull up the website. So I'm going to the query wizard again. And I'm clicking the product category table, and I'm picking both fields. And then I'm going to the product name table, and this time I'm only picking the product name. So the three fields that I selected are a combination of fields from two different tables. So I'm going to click Next, Next, and name it Query 6, and then Finish. And in the product name, you see various product names here. So we want to look for the word sock anywhere. It could be at the beginning, the end, or somewhere in the middle. So let's go over to our criteria guide and go up to text again. And this first option that contains, so the criteria that they have on row number 1 for that section will contain the letter X. We want the word sock in there. So we're going to do kind of the same thing here. I'm going to copy and paste this in order to simplify it a little bit. But where it shows the letter X in between two asterisks and two quotes, we want to put the word sock in the product name. So I'm going to go into Query 6 Design View, and in the column for product name for criteria, I'm actually going to paste what I copied from the website. So it shows like, quote, star, X star. I know that this is kind of small in the video, but I'm going to replace that with sock, and I'm going to run it again. And it finds 4 different records that contain the word sock. So I'm going to close and save. And that completes part 1 of the video. So I'll be back in part 2 of the tutorial, where we're going to be looking at a little bit different types of a little bit more complex queries.